There is a massive Game of Thrones theory masterfully confirmed in House of the Dragon. This series will be split into 7 parts. Part 1 will be the origin of the Grand Maester conspiracy theory in A Song of Ice and Fire. Part 2 will be the first hidden proof of Grand Maester conspiracy in House of the Dragon. Part 3 will be the events explaining the birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy in Fire and Blood. Part 4, Part 5, and Part 6 will be the second, third, and fourth hidden proofs of Grand Maester conspiracy in House of the Dragon. Part 7 will be the secret involvement of House Targ in A Song of Ice and Fire. Part 1, the origin of the Grand Maester conspiracy theory in A Song of Ice and Fire. Our story begins with Samwell Tarly. "There's no more time," Jon sounded sad. "You're going with Gilly." "Eastwatch, my lord? Or where am I?" "Old Town. Aemon as well." "Maester Aemon? But he's 102 years old, my lord. He can't..." "His life will be at risk, I am aware of that, Sam. But the risk is greater here. Stannis knows who Aemon is. If the Red Woman requires King's blood for her spells..." A deep blue dusk was falling as they entered the Whispering Sound. Gilly stood beside the pro with the babe gazing up at a castle on the cliffs. 3 towers, Sam told her. "It's very tall," said Gilly. "Wait until you see the high tower." Game of Thrones Season 6 Episode 10. Sam and Gilly arrive at Old Town. We light the way. The beacon on the high tower. Do you know what color it glows when Old Town calls its banners to war? Green. Sam arrives at the Citadel. "You smell of novice." "I hope to be one soon." Sam drew out the letters Jon Snow had given him. "I came from the Wall with Maester Aemon, but he died during the voyage." So Sam announces the death of Maester Aemon. Part 1, Book 4 of A Song of Ice and Fire, A Feast for Crows. Sam hesitated a moment. Maester Aemon believed that Daenerys Targaryen was the fulfillment of a prophecy. Here he talks to book version of Archmaester Marwyn, who is very different in the books than he is in the TV show. Aemon would have gone to her if he had the strength. He wanted us to send a maester to her, to counsel her, and protect her, and fetch her safely home. Sam tells him about Maester Aemon's last words before he died, and his dragon dream. "Did he?" Archmaester Marwyn shrugged. "Perhaps it's good that he died before he got to Old Town. Elsewise, the Grey Sheep might have had to kill him." "Kill him?" Sam said, shocked. "Why?" "If I tell you, they may need to kill you too." Marwyn smiled a ghastly smile. "Who do you think killed all the dragons the last time around? Gallant dragon slayers armed with swords?" Archmaester Marwyn believes that the Maesters of the Citadel are the ones responsible for the death of all dragons. The last time around, referencing the famous Dance of the Dragons. He spat. "The world the Citadel is building has no place in it for sorcery, or prophecy, or glass candles, much less for dragons." So, the origin of the Grand Maester conspiracy began right here with Archmaester Marwyn. Ask yourself, why Aemon Targaryen was allowed to waste his life upon the Wall when by rights he should have been raised to Archmaester. His blood was why. He could not be trusted, no more than I can. And this is the last time we saw Archmaester Marwyn in the books. "What will you do?" asked Alleras the Sphinx. "Get myself to Slaver's Bay in Aemon's place. With fair winds, I should reach her first." Marwyn glanced at Sam again and frowned. "You should stay and forge your chain. Tell them how wise and good they are. Tell them that Aemon commanded you to put yourself into their hands, but say nothing of prophecies or dragons, unless you fancy poison in your porridge." And here ends the origin of the Grand Maester conspiracy with Archmaester Marwyn. However, it continues in Book 5 of A Song of Ice and Fire, A Dance with Dragons, with the Lady of Barrow herself, Lady Dustin of House Dustin. When Roose Bolton, the new Warden of the North, learns that King Stannis Baratheon has left the Wall, he decides to move Ramsay's wedding from Barrow to Winterfell. Theon Greyjoy, who travels in Lady Dustin's retinue to Winterfell, sits beside her at the wedding feast. as quoted from a wiki of Ice and Fire. As Maester Medrick went to one knee to whisper in Bolton's ear, Lady Dustin's mouth twisted in distaste. If I were queen, the first thing I would do would be to kill all those grey rats. They scurry everywhere, living on the leavings of the lords, chittering to one another, whispering in the ears of their masters. But who are the masters and who are the servants truly? Every great lord has his maester. Every lesser lord aspires to one. If you do not have a maester, it is taken to mean that you are of little consequence. The grey rats read and write our letters, even for such lords as cannot read themselves. And who can say for a certainty that they are not twisting the words for their own ends? What good are they, I ask you? And this is for me the heart of the Grand Maester conspiracy theory, which originated from Archmaester Marwyn and is now finalized by Lady Dustin of House Dustin. They heal, said Theon. It seemed to be expected of him. They heal, yes, I never said they were not subtle. They tend to us when we're sick and injured or distraught over the illness of a parent or a child. Whenever we are weakest and most vulnerable, there they are. Sometimes they heal us and we're dully grateful. When they fail, they console us in our grief, and we're grateful for that as well. Out of gratitude, we give them a place beneath our roof and make them privy to all our shames and secrets. A part of every council, and before too long, the ruler has become the ruled. That was how it was with Lord Rickard Stark. Maester Wallace was his grey rat's name, and isn't it clever how the Maesters go by only one name, even those who had two when they first arrived at the Citadel. That way we cannot know who they truly are or where they come from, but if you're dogged enough, you can still find out. And this is where House Stark enters the conspiracy theory. Before he forged his chain, Maester Wallace had been known as Wallace Flowers. Flowers, hill, rivers, snow. We give such names to baseborn children, aka bastards, to mark them for what they are, but they are always quick to shed them. Wallace Flowers had a Hightower girl for a mother and an Archmaester of the Citadel for a father. It was rumored. The grey rats are not as chaste as they would have us believe. Old Town Maesters are the worst of all. Once he forged his chain, his secret father and his friends wasted no time dispatching him to Winterfell to fill Lord Rickard's ears with poisoned words as sweet as honey. The Tully marriage was his notion never doubted. So all you need to know for now is at the top of the screen there is a family tree representing Lord Rickard Stark and his 4 children. And Lady Dustin is claiming that the reason why Eddard Stark ended up getting married to Catelyn Tully is because his maester, who had a Hightower girl for a mother and an Archmaester of the Citadel for a father, was the one who convinced him to ally both houses of House Tully with House Stark. Part 2. The first hidden proof of Grand Maester conspiracy in House of the Dragon. A letter from a queen meant to be read only by Lord Boros Baratheon. The show then takes time from the season finale to have a bit of dead air to make everyone wait for the Maester. The Lady of Barrowton, Lady Dustin, was right. The Maester reads the letter. He's the first and only person who read Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen's letter. The grey rats read and write our letters, even for such lords as cannot read themselves. Indeed, Lord Boros Baratheon, the Lord of Storm's End, could not read. And no one there at Storm's End can say for a certainty that the Maester didn't twist the words of the letter. If you look up the meaning of twisting someone's words in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the first example is, he twisted my words and made it seem like I was angry. The show makes a point to show us Lord Boros Baratheon in a jolly mood, making jokes and smiling right before the message arrives. King or Queen, the House of the Dragon does not seem to know who rules it. Laughs. Fire and Blood, the book that House of the Dragon is based off, is written from the point of view of an Archmaester of the Citadel, Archmaester Gildane of the Citadel of Old Town. Now, his fictional history book of the history of the Targaryens mostly relied upon well-known Westerosi facts. And the events that happened behind closed doors during the Dance of the Dragons, he mostly relied on accounts from Septon Eustace, the Quartz Full Mushroom, and Grand Maester Munkin. However, none of them were at Storm's End that day. This is the scene where the book and the TV show differences matter the most. In the book, we're not given the detail that Lord Boros was laughing. No man truly know what Boros Baratheon was feeling at that moment. In the books, the accounts of those who were there differ markedly from one another, meaning the TV show added the detail of Lord Boros smiling. The TV show makes a point to show him in a good mood. And in the book, only one thing can be said with certainty, which is the same as in the TV show. Yet all witnesses agree on what Lord Boros said and did. He handed the Queen's letter to his Maester, who cracked the seal and whispered the message into his lordship's ear. A frown stole across Lord Boros' face. Whatever or however the Maester whispered made the Lord of Storm's End angry. The show even added a reminder of his father's oath. In the book, a frown stole across Lord Boros' face, and right away we jump to the next scene, which is, "And if I do as your mother bids, which one of my daughters will you marry, boy?" The Maester knew his Lord Boros well enough to have whispered the message in a way that made it sound like Lord Boros would feel like a dog. The Lord of Storm's End is not a dog that she can whistle up to set against her foes. And the consequences of how the Maester read the message immediately followed with the death of a dragon, and destroyed the last hope that could have prevented House Targaryen from going to war against itself. Jaehaerys called the Great Council to prevent a war being fought over his succession, for he knew the cold truth. The only thing that could tear down the House of the Dragon was itself, and so did the Maesters of Old Town and the Citadel. However, one could say the message did not matter. Lucerys arrived too late. Earlier that day, Lord Boros Baratheon had already made up his mind and picked his side. The Maester delivering the message then could make no difference. Lord Boros proved more than willing to entertain his suit. "I have 4 daughters," he told the prince. "Choose any one you like. Cass is oldest. She'll be first to flower, but Floris is prettier. And if it's a clever wife that you want, there is Maris. Remember the name. My swords and banners for a marriage pact." However, Queen Rhaenyra knew Storm's End well enough. Lord Boros could still have been easily convinced by her letter. Rhaenyra knew Lord Boros' father well enough. She had actually been at Storm's End in episode 4 of season 1, where she was choosing a future husband. And she knew that Lord Boros was a proud man. But in Fire and Blood, it's actually described as a known fact that Boros Baratheon was a man of much different character than his father. Septon Eustace tells us Lord Boros was the wind that rages and howls and blows this way and that. In that scene, there is even a long pause on Rhaenyra's letter. She literally says, "I expect you will receive a very warm welcome." And Lord Boros was known to be just like the wind, meaning he was the wind that rages. Lord Boros was known to be able to become easily angry, which goes in favor of the Greens, of course. But he was like the wind that howls and blows this way and that. He was also known for having words that were just like the wind, meaning his word was known to easily change and blow back towards anyone. It could have easily blown back on the agreement that he had just made to Aemond One Eye had the letter been convincing, which Rhaenyra seemed very confident that it was. The letter from the queen mattered because it could have made the Greens lose Lord Boros Baratheon as an ally, and the consequences of changing his mind on the agreement would have been literally the loss of the Stormlands. Storm's End was known to be a near impossible to capture magical castle. And the Stormlands were known for having an army full of fierce warriors. And Storm's End is also right next to King's Landing, a strategical position to quickly win the war. So, as you can see, the Stormlands were extremely important for the upcoming war, and we can even see on top of Storm's End, Dragonstone, which is extremely close to it. It would have been perfect. So, the Greens could not afford to lose that strategical position. The Maester could secure all of that by making sure Rhaenyra's letter didn't change Lord Boros' mind. When Archmaester Marwyn claimed that the Maesters killed all the dragons the last time around, he meant that the Maesters indirectly killed all the dragons, not directly, because they're not dragon slayers armed with swords. The Maester at Storm's End was only hoping to change the tide of the upcoming war for their own ends, which was in favor of the Greens. He was only trying to create chaos. Chaos is the latter, as Littlefinger famously said. The death of Arrax and Lucerys, which triggered the dance of the dragons, was only a lucky coincidence from the chaos created by the Maester by making sure Lord Boros would get angry. The whole scene is almost identical in the book too, except for one major difference that anyone who would have read the books would have immediately noticed. And there it might have ended, but for the girl Maris, the second-born daughter of Lord Boros, less comely than her sisters, she was angry with Aemon for preferring them to her. Was it one of your eyes he took, or one of your balls? Maris asked the prince in tones sweet as honey. I'm so glad you chose my sister. I want a husband with all his parts. Aemon Targaryen's mouth twisted in rage, and he turned once more to Lord Boros, asking for his leave. The Lord of Storm's End shrugged and answered, "It is not for me to tell you what to do when you're not beneath my roof." And his knights moved aside as Prince Aemon rushed to the doors. So in the book, the triggering event for Aemon to rush after Lucerys is the Baratheon daughter insulting his ego. In the show, the triggering event is only the Maester reading the letter which made Boros angry. So the show version of this scene is confirming to us that the Maester reading the letter was the main triggering event that caused the death of Lucerys Velaryon and his dragon Arrax. You have Baratheon blood, Queen Rhaenyra told Lucerys. That is because how Lord Boros Baratheon is related to Lucerys Velaryon is actually very important as well. So, King Aegon the Conqueror was married to his two sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. Aegon and Rhaenys had one son, who became King Aenys Targaryen, the second king ever in Westeros, and Queen Alyssa Velaryon became the third queen to rule over all of Westeros. When King Aenys Targaryen died, Queen Alyssa Velaryon remarried to Lord Rhaegar Baratheon, who was the hand of the king at the time. Lord Rhaegar and Queen Alyssa had two children, Lady Jocelyn Baratheon and Lord Bormund Baratheon. Episode 4, as you remember, where Lord Bormund Baratheon hosted Rhaenyra Targaryen to find the princess a future husband in Storm's End. So, Lord Bormund Baratheon had one son, Lord Boros Baratheon, and Queen Alyssa Velaryon and King Aenys Targaryen had 6 children. 2 of them were King Jaehaerys Targaryen and Queen Alysanne Targaryen, good Queen Alysanne. Now, one of their children, the male heir at the time, was Prince Aemon Targaryen. He was Prince of Dragonstone and got married to the daughter of Queen Alyssa Velaryon and Lord Rhaegar, Lady Jocelyn Baratheon. And their daughter, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, then had 2 children, Laena Velaryon and Prince Laenor Velaryon. And Prince Laenor Velaryon got married to Rhaenyra, which had Prince Lucerys Velaryon. So, technically, Lord Boros Baratheon and Prince Lucerys are directly linked through blood. And now we add to our family tree Prince Aemon Targaryen. The prince was 13 years of age, his body was never found, and with his death, the war of ravens and envoys and marriage pacts came to an end, and the war of fire and blood began in earnest. Aemon Targaryen, who would henceforth be known as Aemond the Kinslayer to his foes, returned to King's Landing, having won the support of Storm's End for his brother Aegon and the undying enmity of Queen Rhaenyra. Some great aunt was a comment that Lord Boros Baratheon had made in the book before Lucerys Velaryon arrived when he was hosting Aemon Targaryen. Rhaenyra had taken House Baratheon for granted for too long, his lordship told Aemond. Rhaenys is kin to me and mine. Some great aunt I never knew was married to her father, but the both of them are dead and Rhaenyra, she's not Rhaenys, is she? So, his father Bormund would have told him that Jocelyn Baratheon was his only sister, making her Lord Boros' direct aunt and not some great aunt. And it also proves that his Maester purposefully did not remind him of his own family tree, which is the duty of a Maester to his lord. But Aemon Targaryen was not the only one with blood on his hands. Aemon the Kinslayer, as they started calling him. Lord Boros Baratheon also had blood on his hands. So here we're being shown that the Maester's power of manipulating the lords of Westeros can even turn them against members of their own family, indirect kinslaying. Kinslaying is a great taboo in Westeros. Any individual who kills a member of their own family is dubbed a kinslayer and is believed to be cursed forever. Indirect kinslaying is still kinslaying. Lord Boros grew uneasy. Not here, he grumbled. He came as an envoy. I want no bloodshed beneath my roof. And we see the Maester standing right beside him. Indirect kinslaying is still kinslaying when you're telling the person who wants to murder a member of your family, oh, just don't do it right here, not under my roof. Indirectly telling Aemon that it was okay to kill Lucerys outside. Another example of being indirectly involved in violating a sacred Westerosi law is Tywin Lannister, who was indirectly involved in violating guest right when he committed and planned the Red Wedding. So Lord Walder Frey slew him under his own roof at his own table. Tyrion made a fist. What of Lady Catelyn? Slain as well, replied Tywin. So much for guest right, said Tyrion. The blood is on Walder Frey's hands, not mine, famously said Tywin in A Storm of Swords. The guest right is a sacred law of hospitality. When invoked, neither the guest nor the host can harm the other for the length of the guest's stay. For either to do so would be to break a sacred covenant that is believed to invoke the wrath of the gods, both old and new. Tywin Lannister died only 1 year after the Red Wedding. One unlikely, keep in mind, but interesting theory is that Tywin died so soon after the Red Wedding, at a time when the Lannister had finally won the War of the Five Kings, because he invoked the wrath of the gods, both old and new, when he indirectly violated the sacred law of guest right. George R.R. Martin was heavily involved in House of the Dragon. Ryan Condal, the mastermind behind House of the Dragon, said in a Game of Thrones podcast that he was a very big fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, and this quote from the interview that Ryan Condal had with Deadline says, "So, generally, it's George and I in communication. I send him everything. I send him outlines, I send him scripts, I send him cuts, I send him text messages, I send him questions. Why did you do this? What does this mean? Who is this person?" We stay in constant communication. He's very active and reads a lot and gives a lot of feedback. Other times, he just defers and says, "Go with the gods." So, Ryan Condal would have definitely had many conversations with George R.R. Martin related to the final scene of the season of House of the Dragon Season 1 that was meant to win back all the fans after Game of Thrones. Meaning, every little detail in the scene that we saw with Lord Boros Baratheon and Lucerys Velaryon are extremely important. If the Lord of Storm's End and head of House Baratheon and the grandson of the third queen that Westeros had ever seen could not read and be manipulated to commit indirect kinslaying following the whispering of a Maester in his ear, it means that the Maesters have a lot more power than they let to appear. The show masterfully confirms that Archmaester Marwyn and Lady Dustin were both right. The show also masterfully confirms that the Grand Maester conspiracy is true, and that the Maesters were behind the triggering events that led to the Dance of the Dragons. And I just want to say thank you to Ryan Condal, the mastermind behind this TV show, because you know that he left no stones left unturned, and that he would have had to check with George R.R. Martin with every little detail that would have led to the death of Lucerys Velaryon. The death of Lucerys Velaryon, first ever shown to us in the world of Ice and Fire in 2014, then the second time in Fire and Blood in 2018, and then in A Song of Ice and Fire calendar by Sam Hogue in 2021, and finally in The Rise of the Dragon the same day as the season finale in 2022. Part 3. The reason for the birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy and the Hightower Citadel fate of the Seven Alliance. First, we need to understand the function of the Maesters and the Citadel of Old Town. The Citadel is a complex of buildings in Old Town that serves as the central home to the Order of the Maesters. And the Maesters are an order of scholars, healers, messengers, and scientists. But what is the involvement of House Hightower with the Maesters and the Citadel? Well, House Hightower was integral in the Citadel's foundation and continues to preserve the order. Leighton Hightower, the Lord of Old Town at the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, includes Protector of the Citadel among his titles. The office of the Grand Maester was created by Aegon Targaryen, the first of his name, Aegon the Conqueror. He requested for an Archmaester of the Citadel to advise him on governing the Seven Kingdoms. Sworn to serve the whole realm, the Grand Maester sits on the King's Small Council and acts as one of the royal advisors, as the Citadel's representative at the royal court of the King on the Iron Throne. Who are the Archmaesters? The Archmaesters are Maesters who have demonstrated mastery of a particular subject. Archmaesters have the right to sit on the Conclave, a council which elects the Grand Maester and determines when the seasons change. The meetings of the Conclave are conducted behind closed doors at the Citadel. When Aegon Targaryen, the first of his name, landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, the High Septon in Old Town locked himself inside the Starry Sept and prayed for 7 whole days while refusing to eat or drink. The greatest city in all of Westeros, ruled by the Hightowers of the Hightower, the oldest, richest, and most powerful of the noble houses of the Reach, Old Town was also the center of the fate. At the end of the 7th day, the High Septon emerged from his fast and declared that the fate of the Seven would not fight Aegon's conquest, proclaiming that if they did, Old Town would burn and the Starry Sept would be destroyed. That was how Aegon the Conqueror captured Old Town. Now, what were House Hightower doing during Aegon's conquest? The conquest, which pretty much ended with the Battle of the Field of Fire that you see on the right, where some great houses got completely extinct. Lord Hightower determined that he would not oppose the conqueror by force of arms. Thus, it was that no men from Old Town burned on the Field of Fire. Indeed, Lord Hightower determined that he would not oppose the conqueror by force of arms, meaning that he could oppose the conqueror or House Targaryen overall with other means that are not violent. The fate of the Seven, recognizing and crowning Aegon Targaryen as the first king of all of Westeros. Within the Starry Sept, the High Septon declared Aegon to be king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, the First Man, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. And this is how King Aegon Targaryen, first of his name, and first king on the Iron Throne, became the ruler of all of Westeros. Aegon treated the defeated lords with respect and allowed each region to retain its own laws and customs. Aegon often traveled the realm with 6 Maesters, who educated him on each region's local customs and history, so Aegon needed the Maesters for their knowledge and wisdom. But the wisest and most learned men in the Seven Kingdoms were the Archmaesters of the Citadel, each of them the supreme authority in one of the great discipline. In 5 AC, AC meaning after the conquest, King Aegon, feeling that the realm might benefit from such wisdom, requested the Conclave to send him one of their own number to advise and consult with him on all matters related to the governance of the realm. Thus was the office of Grand Maester created at King Aegon's request. Aegon wanted and needed an Archmaester. During his rule, Aegon tread carefully with the fate of the Seven so they would not oppose him. Aegon built a grand sept on Visenya's hill and agreed to the construction of an even grander one known as the Sept of Remembrance. The first question of succession then arose. Indeed, King Aegon the Conqueror was married to his 2 sisters, Queen Visenya and Queen Rhaenys. The 2 queens each had a son. Visenya had Maegor and Rhaenys had Aenys. Aenys was older than Maegor. He was the one who became king on the Iron Throne following the death of King Aegon the Conqueror after he had a stroke. Prince Aenys was the unquestioned heir to the Iron Throne, all agreed. But now an issue arose as to whether Prince Maegor remained second in the line of succession or should be considered to have fallen to third behind the newborn prince. Indeed, King Aenys Targaryen had been married to Queen Alyssa Velaryon to unite the 2 great houses. His High Holiness proposed a different bride from Maegor, his own niece, Cerys Hightower, introducing Cerys Hightower, maiden daughter to the Lord of Oldtown, Manfred Hightower. King Aegon, mindful of the advantages of closer ties with Oldtown and his ruling house, saw wisdom in the choice and agreed to the match. Maegor was thus betrothed to Lady Cerys Hightower, whom he married in a ceremony presided over by the High Septon himself. And as we see on this picture of the family tree, Aenys and Alyssa Velaryon had a daughter, Rhaena Targaryen, the birth of the Hightower Citadel Fate of the Seven Alliance. 2 years after Aegon the Conqueror's death from a stroke, King Aenys and Queen Alyssa had a 6th child. Yet, Maegor's 14-year marriage to Lady Cerys Hightower still remained barren. Consequently, Maegor took a drastic step, marrying a second wife in secret on Dragonstone using a Valyrian rite officiated by the Dowager Queen Visenya. When King Aenys was informed of the marriage, the quarrel that followed was bitter, and the feeling was echoed by Lady Cerys' father, Lord Manfred Hightower, and the High Septon himself, who denounced Maegor for the sin of bigamy. Maegor was defiant. Given the choice to renounce Alice Harroway or go into exile across the Narrow Sea, he chose the latter, taking Alice, Balerion, and the sword Blackfire with him and leaving Cerys Hightower abandoned at King's Landing. Maegor angered the Fate of the Seven. In 41 AC, convinced that Maegor's exile had repaired the anger against House Targaryen, Aenys decided to betroth his daughter Princess Rhaena to her brother Prince Aegon. The High Septon denounced the marriage plans, continued to escalate the conflict, calling Aenys King Abomination in fiery sermons, and the Fate militant took up arms. The army of the Fate of the Seven, the warriors' sons, and the poor fellows. The Fate militant was made up of 2 military orders, the nobles and the puissant order of the warriors' sons and the poor fellows. The warriors' sons were the most illustrious, acting as the High Septon's personal guard and army. The warriors' sons. All members were knights, and most were men of high birth, younger sons of great houses of ancient lineage. Their sigil was the warrior's rainbow sword on black, as we can see in the beautiful art by Joshua Kairos, which you can find all of his art on his website. The failed assassination attempt on King Aenys' life by the Fate of the Seven. Sir Raymond Baratheon of the King's Guard saved King Aenys' life when 2 poor fellows scaled the walls of the king's manse upon Visenya's hill and slipped into the royal apartments in an attempt to murder the king. At Dragonstone, Dowager Queen Visenya counseled him to bring fire and blood to the Starry Sept and the Sept of Remembrance, which, remember, we said earlier King Aegon the Conqueror had built for the Fates as a gift so that they would not oppose the House of the Dragon. Aenys refused to do so, but at the same time was incapable of deciding how to act instead. And unfortunately, thus came the successful assassination of King Aenys Targaryen. Eventually, the king fell ill. By late 41 AC, most of the realm had turned against him. His health improved briefly when Dowager Queen Visenya took over his care, but the king died 3 days later. Years afterward, however, it would be whispered that Visenya had poisoned the king. The Dowager Queen Visenya departed Dragonstone on Vhagar in the hour following Aenys' death, but she was not gone for long. When she returned to Dragonstone, it was with Prince Maegor and Balerion at her side. Maegor stopped on Dragonstone only long enough to claim his father Aegon's crown. His mother placed it on his head, much as she had for his own father years ago, declaring him king. The coronation of King Maegor Targaryen. However, Grand Maester Gawain protested Maegor's coronation, stating that by all the laws of inheritance, the crown should pass to Aegon, the son of Aenys. Maegor beheaded Gawain with Blackfire, ending contention against Maegor's ascension, and thus came about the first Grand Maester beheading, the death of Grand Maester Gawain. The first major event explaining the birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy. Indeed, thus followed the reign of Maegor Targaryen from 42 AC after the conquest to 48 AC. So, remember the failed assassination attempt on King Aenys' life by the Fate of the Seven at Dragonstone? Dowager Queen counseled him to bring fire and blood to the Starry Sept and the Sept of Remembrance. Aenys refused to do so. Well, the reign of King Maegor the Cruel started with a fire. Maegor brought fire and blood to the Sept of Remembrance. Maegor flew Balerion to the Hill of Rhaenys, setting the Sept of Remembrance alight as the warriors' sons were at their morning prayers. Those that fled the Inferno were slain by Maegor's waiting soldiers. 700 men died that day, and the Order of the Warriors' Sons would never again rise to its former glory. Thus came about Maegor's third wedding. On his return to King's Landing, Maegor declared his intent to marry Tiana of the Tower. The only one to raise an objection was Grand Maester Myros. "Your one true wife awaits you in the High Tower," Myros said about Ciri's Hightower. The king heard him out in silence, then descended from the throne, drew Blackfire, and slew him where he stood. Thus came about the second Grand Maester beheading, the death of Grand Maester Myros. The second major event explaining the birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy. The High Septon condemned Maegor's third wedding. In 43 AC, King Maegor and Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen moved towards Oldtown, threatening to incinerate the Starry Sept in response to the High Septon's continued condemnation of his polygamous marriages. The High Septon instead died suddenly, shortly before they arrived. Ciri's Hightower then agreed to accept Maegor's other two wives. When Queen Alice Haraway announced that she was pregnant, she went into labor only 3 months later and gave birth to a monstrosity eyeless and twisted. "This cannot be my son!" Maegor roared in anguish. Then his grief turned to fury, and he ordered the immediate execution of the midwife and septas who had charge of the queen's care, and Grand Maester Desmond as well, sparing only Alice's sisters. It is said that Maegor was seated on the Iron Throne with the head of the Grand Maester in his hands when Queen Tiana came to tell him he had been deceived. The child was not his seed. On the nights when the king was sharing a bed with Queen Cerise or Queen Tiana, Lucas Haraway, her father, sent men to his daughter's bed to get her with child. Maegor refused to believe that. He told Tiana she was a jealous witch and barren, throwing the Grand Maester's head at her. Spiders do not lie. the mistress of the Whisperers, replied. She handed the king a list. Written there were the names of 20 men alleged to have given their seed to Queen Alice. This is the third major event explaining the birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy. 3 Grand Maesters were beheaded during the reign of King Maegor the Cruel. Still without an heir, Maegor decided to marry yet again, but this time he took 3 more wives. The Black Brides, they called them, were the 3 wives of King Maegor Targaryen, who wed them in a single ceremony held in 47 AC, officiated by the new High Septon. Maegor chose them because the 3 women were of proven fertility. All had been widows of men who had died in Maegor's wars or at his command. Among the 3 was his own niece, Princess Rhaena, the daughter of his brother Aenys, who had remained on Fair Isle since her brother Aegon's death. 6 wives and not 1 child. Safe to assume it was not Cerys Hightower who had been barren, but actually King Maegor Targaryen himself who was sterile. In 45 AC, Cerys Hightower died of a sudden illness. It was rumored she had said something to offend Maegor, and he ordered Sir Owen Bush of the King's Guard to remove her tongue. While Sir Maladon Moore held her, Cerys allegedly struggled so much that Owen's knife slipped and he accidentally slashed her throat. Though never proven, this story was widely believed at the time. The butchering of Cerys Hightower and the loss of their queen was the major event explaining the reason for House Hightower to join the Maesters of the Citadel in an alliance against House Targaryen. And thus came about the birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy and the Hightower Citadel Fate of the Seven Alliance. However, this was only the birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy, but not the beginning of the conspiracy itself. The reign of Jaehaerys Targaryen from 48 AC to 103 AC was the most peaceful time that Westeros had ever seen since King Aegon the Conqueror had created the role of King of all of Westeros. King Jaehaerys Targaryen was called the Conciliator. There was no need for the Grand Maester conspiracy to act under the reign of King Jaehaerys, since it was a peaceful time and he was a very good ruler that was able to conciliate all of the parties together in an unprecedented period of peace. But remember, Fire and Blood, the book on which House of the Dragon is based off, and the history of the Targaryens, was written from the point of view of Archmaester Gildain, an Archmaester of the Citadel of Oldtown, and he himself, in Fire and Blood, said the following: "The old king and good Queen Alysanne ruled together until her death in 100 AC, and she produced 13 children. 4 of them, 2 sons and 2 daughters, grew to maturity, married, and produced children of their own. Never before or since had the 7 kingdoms been blessed or cursed, in the view of some, with so many Targaryen princelings. From the loins of the old king and his beloved queen sprang such a confusion of claims and claimants that many maesters believed that the dance of the dragons or some similar struggle was inevitable. This was not apparent in the early years of Jaehaerys. So as this quote states, it was not apparent before in the early years of Jaehaerys that there would ever be a chance of another Maegor the Cruel. Otto Hightower himself, in the first episode of House of the Dragon, said Daemon would be a second Maegor or worse, that they had to do something to prevent that from happening. The birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy rose from the fear of a second Maegor, which rose from the fact that Jaehaerys and good Queen Alysanne had so many children, and that the Maesters of the Citadel, as well as the Fate of the Seven, were scared that another Maegor would arise, and all of the atrocities that we just mentioned, and he did a lot more than that we didn't mention, would happen again. This is a very good reason for the conspiracy to exist and for the conspiracy to start acting around the time of the death of good Queen Alysanne. Now I'd like you to consider the following. You are an Archmaester of the Citadel, and the current Targaryen king needs a new Grand Maester. And whether you want to or not, the Conclave can vote to make you the new Grand Maester to the king. Wouldn't you be scared that this king, or the one after him, his heir, decides to one day behead you because they did not like your counsel or opinion, which the role of Grand Maester was created for that exact purpose by Aegon the Conqueror? They call it the Targaryen madness. They say that every time a new Targaryen is born, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. Now consider the following. You are from House Hightower. Would you forget what happened to the only Hightower queen that ever was? Wouldn't you want to prevent it from happening again to your daughter if you were Otto Hightower? Wouldn't you want to prevent it from happening to Alicent Hightower? Can you really blame the Greens and the Maesters of the Citadel for the Grand Maester conspiracy? So, let's begin with part 4. First, we need to ask the following question. What is King Viserys really suffering from? Now, back in the fall, Entertainment Weekly on their Game of Thrones podcast had the actor who plays King Viserys, Paddy Considine, as a guest on the show. And he said that King Viserys is actually suffering from a form of leprosy. His body is deteriorating. His bones are deteriorating. He's not actually that old. He's still a young man in there. He's just unfortunately got this thing that's taken over his body. It becomes a metaphor for being king and the stress and strain that it puts on you, what it does to you physically and what it does to you mentally. Let's focus on this one part. He's not actually old. He's still a young man in there. Indeed, Viserys Targaryen was born in 77 AC by his mother Alyssa Targaryen. In 81 AC, Princess Alyssa had a second son, who was given the name Daemon. So let's look at this picture right here from episode 8. I know that as I was watching House of the Dragon, some of my friends were under the impression that King Viserys had become very old by the end of the season. However, on this picture, knowing that Daemon and Viserys are supposed to only have 4 years of age difference, it becomes very clear that Viserys Targaryen was still a young man in there. Actually, in the books, the commons called him the Young King upon his ascent. So, what is this mysterious disease that Viserys the Young King is suffering from that is making him look that old? And now we come back to the misleading quote of Paddy Considine. A form of leprosy. If you Google the disease that King Viserys is suffering from, you will find that every website shows you that he had leprosy based on the quote from Paddy Considine. However, the Leprosy Mission International website even themselves said that some of the disfigurements were a little wild even for a time before modern medicine, and that King Viserys did not experience the usual leprosy symptoms. If King Viserys did have leprosy that went untreated, then we might have expected to see the damage on his body focused around his hands and feet. Also, the king didn't experience any obvious mental health difficulties. So the question, did King Viserys even had leprosy to begin with, needs to be asked. As the Leprosy Mission International website states, he might have done, but it was a very, very extreme form of leprosy. So one symptom of leprosy that they definitely got correct in the TV show is the fact that there has been about 20 years between episode 1 and episode 8, and that is exactly the time that the CDC website states about the growth of the leprosy bacteria, that it takes about 20 years or so to develop signs of the infection.
The first season takes place, over about 20 years or so.
However, there are many major leprosy symptoms missing in the TV show. So, one evidence disproving the fact that King Viserys was really suffering from leprosy was that there were no symptoms of swollen nerves under the skin. Moreover, there were no symptoms showing the loss of the ability to sense touch or pain. Alicent Hightower herself says that the disease actually subjects him to considerable pain. Another symptom missing is that his injuries on the Iron Throne are not due to the lack of sensation. Actually, King Viserys notices when he cuts himself on the Iron Throne. And one of the major symptoms missing that the Leprosy Mission International states on their website, and that we can notice here as well, is that there are no symptoms of paralysis of hands and feet. If left untreated, leprosy causes nerve damage, such as paralysis. Moreover, how could Viserys have gotten leprosy? First, leprosy is not really contagious. It requires prolonged close contact with someone with untreated leprosy over many months to catch the disease. Moreover, no one around Viserys got leprosy, even though he was surrounded by people. Alicent Hightower in particular, whom he had multiple children with, never showed any symptoms of leprosy. So while researching the disease, the mystery was finally solved when I discovered an interview that Variety released on the day of the season finale with prosthetic designer Barry Gower. So he explained that they researched various flesh-eating disorders, necrosis, leprosy, all kinds of horrible references. And he specifically states that for 1 or 2 scenes, they had to use a body double who had a very slender body and a very pronounced bone structure, and that they shot some of the scenes with sores on his back and necrosis on his collarbone and shoulders. Then they shot the same scenes again with Paddy, and using VFX were able to manipulate Paddy's face onto the body double's body. So Barry, the prosthetic designer, mentions specifically only 2 diseases that they researched mostly for the show: leprosy and necrosis. And he only mentions one of the 2 that were used for multiple scenes, which was necrosis. Necrosis symptoms were important enough that it required usage of a body double and reshoots with Paddy Considine using VFX effects. Sores on his back and necrosis on his shoulders and back. So what is exactly necrosis? Necrosis is the medical term for the death of the body tissue. When the cells in your tissues die, it can affect many different areas of your body, including bones, skin, and organs. Necrosis can occur because of illness, infection, injury, and disease, or the lack of blood flow to your tissues. So one of the necrosis symptoms is grayish smelly liquid draining from the wound. Another necrosis symptom is pain that seems more severe than it should. Another necrosis symptom is rapidly spreading redness from the wound, like we see on his back. Moreover, we also have the proof of how King Viserys could have caught necrosis, because the bacteria most commonly enters the body through a break in the skin. Different breaks in the skin can include cuts and scrapes, just like he gets on the Iron Throne, and King Viserys actually says it's a small cut from sitting on the throne. It's nothing. However, another cause of necrosis is burns. But Viserys is never seen or known to get burns accidentally or voluntarily. But in episode 1, if you were paying attention, Grand Maester Mellos recommends cauterization as a treatment for the infection on King Viserys' back. To cauterize something is to burn a wound. From here unwraps the second proof of Grand Maester conspiracy in House of the Dragon, and the first evidence that Grand Maester Mellos is the one who killed Viserys the Young King. King Viserys was right when he said it's nothing, it's only a small cut from sitting on the throne. But then Grand Maester Mellos recommended this cauterization by burning the skin. He actually made the healthy skin way worse and caused the small infected cut to be way more infected than it already was. He even told King Viserys it will be painful, and King Viserys, who trusts his Grand Maester, just agreed to this treatment. So the very well-held.com website specifies that causes of necrosis can come for a variety of reasons. Anything from a car accident to falling from a ladder can result in traumatic injury that triggers necrosis. But another reason they mention is from burns. Moreover, they state that in certain cases, and they take the example of frostbites, in which tissues are severely damaged by cold or heat, is a common cause of necrosis. If frostbite is not treated quickly, the frostbitten area turns black and dies, causing gangrene. So the area turning black around the frostbitten area means that it's becoming gangrene. Gangrene are necrotic tissues that cannot be healed and require amputation. In episode 3, we noticed that the area around the fingers of King Viserys has turned black, and that he actually got an off-screen amputation between episode 1 and episode 3. And it usually begins around the fingers and toes or hands or feet. Without prompt treatment, gangrene can be fatal, which is why we see that King Viserys' fingers had been amputated. People with severe injuries are also at a higher risk of gangrene, and higher risk of gangrene comes from such injuries such as severe burns, like the ones that he got from the cauterization treatment of Grand Maester Mellos. Moreover, another risk of gangrene comes from a weakened immune system. The big question now is, did Grand Maester Mellos know that he was giving Viserys gangrene by his cauterization treatment? Was Grand Maester Mellos purposefully killing Viserys by purposefully administrating the wrong treatments that he knew would make the little cut from the throne much worse than it originally was? Or was it a mistake of judgment from his part? Otto Hightower is the only one in the whole season in episode 1 who questions the origin of the disease. Mellos says right there that inquiries to the Citadel had already been sent, meaning before episode 1, research into similar cases was already happening. Now, I created this little timeline to give us an idea of how things went down with the Citadel of Grand Maester Mellos. In episode 1 begins in 101 with the Great Council of 101 AC. Then at the end of episode 1, we have the ceremonial confirmation of Rhaenyra Targaryen, which should be around 112 AC. A year later in episode 2, King Viserys marries Alicent Hightower in 113 AC. So, episode 3, when we see the missing fingers that were amputated, was 4 years after episode 1. In 4 years, Grand Maester Mellos would have received the knowledge of the Citadel of Oldtown, which had the greatest library in Westeros, and they would have told him that cauterization and the treatments that he was using would only cause the patient to have worsened symptoms. Remember in part 3 of this series, we covered the origin of the Maesters, and we said that Archmaesters of the Citadel are supposed to be the wisest and most learned men in Westeros. The first Grand Maester was literally appointed because King Aegon the Conqueror, feeling that the realm might benefit from such wisdom, asked the conclave of the Citadel to send him one of their own number to advise and consult with him on all matters relating to the governance of the realm. Thus was the office of Grand Maester created at King Aegon's request. So did Grand Maester Mellos know that he was using the wrong treatments? Mellos was an Archmaester of the Citadel before becoming Grand Maester. He had plenty of experience with infected wounds. Mellos and the Citadel probably did not even need to research similar cases, because back in the medieval age, infections from rusted swords or rusted metal or steel were very common. And this is the king that we're talking about. They would have given him the best treatment possible. The only reason why Grand Maester Mellos said that they sent inquiries to the Citadel in episode 1 was because he was in front of the king and did not want to raise suspicion. Moreover, why is the king's own Grand Maester going to another room to have a secret conversation with the hand of the king to share information concerning the king's disease that he does not want the king himself to be aware of? Imagine if that had happened to King Aegon the Conqueror. That would not have passed. But they're taking advantage of King Viserys' trust and kindness. Remember in part 3 how we were talking about the origin of the Maesters with King Aegon the Conqueror? Now that we understand the origins and the role of the Grand Maester, we understand that the Archmaester was requested to consult and advise the king himself, not the hand of the king. So why is the king's own Grand Maesters taking orders from the hand, a Hightower, when he tells him whatever it is, it needs to be kept quiet about the details of the disease? This is the last scene in the whole show in episode 1 where the disease is ever questioned, and Grand Maester Mellos continued his treatments and King Viserys Targaryen continued to die. So the second proof of Grand Maester conspiracy, masterfully confirmed in House of the Dragon by the genius Ryan Condal, the showrunner, is the assassination of King Viserys by the Grand Maester conspiracy. And the first evidence is cauterization of small wounds, making them so much more infected and worsened into gangrene and necrosis. The second evidence is when he has a conversation with Maester Orwyle in episode 5. Orwyle tells him, "If I may, Grand Maester, I took the liberty of preparing a fresh set of herbal poultices that might be more effective." Melos replies to him, "That will not be necessary, Orwyle. The leechings have always brought his grace relief." And let's go back to our timeline. Episode 4 happens around 117 AC, so episode 5 must have been around the same period of time, or maybe a year or two later. So technically, almost 8 years. So the second evidence proving the assassination of King Viserys is when Grand Maester Melos is shown to us still refusing to use better treatments 8 years later in favor of using the same old, wrong, and ineffective treatments. The third evidence of the assassination of King Viserys is the weak immune system that fosters gangrene. And we see one of the young maesters telling Grand Maester Melos it's a wound that refuses to heal, exactly like the symptoms of necrosis describe it. Remember this scene when Rhaenyra Targaryen told Alicent Hightower that her and her dad were warming the throne while King Viserys was addled on the milk of the poppy? Let us look into the milk of the poppy, which is part of the third evidence of the assassination of King Viserys. So what is the milk of the poppy? Milk of the poppy is an opiate used to dull the pain, basically natural opioids. In Book 1 of A Song of Ice and Fire, Mirri Maz Duur tells Daenerys Targaryen when Khal Drogo is injured in battle, she has the Magi Mirri Maz Duur treat him, and Mirri Maz Duur warns her and warns the Khal not to use the milk of the poppy so that his body can better resist infection. Khal Drogo drinks the milk of the poppy nevertheless and becomes very ill and then dies. The exact quote from Mirri Maz Duur is, "Drink neither wine nor the milk of the poppy," she cautioned him. "Pain you will have, but you must keep your body strong to fight the poison spirits." Moreover, in that same chapter, Dany asks her, "Where did you learn your healing, Mirri Maz Duur?" And she says that she learned it from a maester from the Sunset Lands who opened a body for her and showed her all the secrets that hide beneath the skin. Basically an autopsy. And Sir Jorah Mormont spoke up surprised, saying a maester, and she replied, "Marwyn, he named himself." Do you remember in part 1 of this series when we covered the origin of the Grand Maester conspiracy? We talked about book version of Archmaester Marwyn. Do you remember what he said? When he said, "Who do you think killed all the dragons the last time around?" He was literally opening up a body right there on the table while talking to Samwell Tarly. So if Archmaester Marwyn knows that the milk of the poppy lowers the body's ability to fight the poison spirit, then Grand Maester Melos, who used to be an Archmaester before becoming a Grand Maester, would also know that concept. So when we read a sword that won't heal, especially if you have a weak immune system, we actually start realizing that King Viserys is shown repeatedly drinking the milk of the poppy through the entire season. And in episode 5, we're specifically shown the milk of the poppy being given to him. Archmaester Marwyn, remember, told Sam, "It's good that Maester Aemon died before arriving to the citadel of Old Town, because if he got to Old Town, the Grey Sheep might have had to kill him." And now we remember Mirri Maz Duur telling Khal Drogo not to use the milk of the poppy so that his body can resist infection. And we see that the effects of opioids on the immune system are overwhelming, suggesting that it affects both innate and adaptive immunity. George R.R. Martin does not write things without having a purpose. This is why he's an amazing writer. It's one of the proofs that show that Grand Maester Melos knows about this concept of better resisting infection. He literally tells Sir Otto Hightower, "Bad humors of the mind can adversely affect the body," which reminds us exactly the concept of keeping your body strong to fight the poison spirits. There is even this clip in episode 8 where Daemon is suspiciously smelling the cup beside King Viserys' bedchamber. In King Viserys' bedchamber, we see Daemon and Rhaenyra in episode 8 finally noticing that the Greens have been making Viserys drink the milk of the poppy so that the Queen and the Hand could take over all the duties of the king and rule over the Seven Kingdoms. Rhaenyra even makes a joke to Daemon saying, "What can either of us know of ruling a kingdom?" when Alicent enters the room, and she replies to that, "I do not rule, as you may well know. My father and I are mere stewards of the king's will and wisdom." And how exactly is that wisdom expressed? Daemon said jokingly in Blinks and Wheezes, implying that King Viserys has been drugged on the milk of the poppy so much that he'd be surprised if he even remembered his own name. And in this clip, Alicent says that it is on the advice of the Maesters. And then right away, Rhaenyra laughs, saying, "Ah, the Maesters." And she says sarcastically, "Of course it is they who keep him addled on the milk of the poppy while the Hightowers warm his throne." And now, if you've watched part 3 of this series, you understand why I made a whole video explaining the birth of the Grand Maester conspiracy through the Hightower Citadel Fate of the Seven Alliance in Old Town. So the third evidence proving the assassination of King Viserys Targaryen is the milk of the poppy. If Maester Marwyn knew that the milk of the poppy makes the body weaker against the poison spirits, then Grand Maester Mellos would have known this as well. Lady Dustin was right. If you remember when we covered part 1, the origin of the Grand Maester conspiracy theory, Lady Dustin asks Theon, "What good are the Maesters?" And Theon replies, "They heal. It seemed expected of him." "They heal, yes. I never said they were not subtle," replied Lady Dustin. Do you remember when we said that the necrotic tissues require surgical amputation when the area turns black because it means that gangrene has developed or it can be fatal to the patient? At first, I thought that the reason why Grand Maester Mellos amputated the 2 fingers was so that they would be subtle, exactly like Lady Dustin said, that sometimes they have to heal you so that they won't raise suspicions. One of the reasons why I thought that, I covered in part 3. When the High Septon gave up Old Town to Aegon the Conqueror, after 7 days of fasting, he emerged from his fast and declared that the Fate of the Seven would not fight Aegon's conquest, proclaiming that if they did, Old Town would burn and the Steri Sept would be destroyed. That is exactly what almost happened to the Steri Sept when the Fate of the Seven clumsily tried to kill King Aenys, and when they failed, Dowager Queen Visenya counseled King Aenys to bring fire and blood to the Steri Sept of Old Town and the Sept of Remembrance of King's Landing. King Aenys at the time refused to do so, but when King Maegor became king, he did exactly that to the Sept of Remembrance, flew there, burned it to the ground, killed 700 warriors' sons of the Fate of the Seven. None of them survived, and the warriors' sons never came back. But then, while looking into the appointment of Grand Maester Mellos, I noticed some other suspicious activities. In the books, both Grand Maester Runesitter and Sir Harold Westerling of the King's Guard died within a month of each other in the year of 112 AC, 2 years before Rhaenyra's marriage to Laenor Velaryon. Grand Maester Mellos replaced Grand Maester Runesitter around that time, and 2 years later, Rhaenyra Targaryen married Laenor Velaryon, which was a match encouraged by the new Grand Maester, Grand Maester Mellos. He encouraged the match despite the fact that Laenor was known not to be interested in women. So the exact quote from Fire and Blood was, "One objection was raised. Laenor Velaryon was now 19 years of age, yet he had never shown any interest in women. Instead, he surrounded himself with handsome squires of his own age, and was said to prefer their company. But Grand Maester Mellos dismissed this concern out of hand. What of it, he said. I do not like the taste of fish, but when fish is served, I eat it. Thus was the match decided." And then Grand Maester Mellos himself was the one who suggested that the fire at Harrenhal that killed both Lord Lionel Strong and his heir Sir Harwin Strong was ordered by King Viserys. The direct quote from Fire and Blood is that Mellos implied that the king had come to accept the rumors that his grandchildren by his daughter Rhaenyra were really bastards sired by Harwin. Thus he desired to keep the truth concealed and kill the man who had dishonored his daughter. And it was at this moment, while researching these suspicious activities of Grand Maester Mellos, that I stumbled upon the following discovery. A rewritten Fire and Blood passage in the recently released Rise of the Dragon book. Keep in mind, Fire and Blood, the book upon which House of the Dragon was based off, was published in 2018. And Rise of the Dragon, which is an illustrated summary of House of the Dragon, was released the week after the season finale of House of the Dragon in 2022. So they coordinated the end of the TV show so that people would buy this illustrated, summarized version of the book that it's based on. This exact passage in Fire and Blood was actually changed in Rise of the Dragon. His Grace stumbled and reached out to right himself and sliced his left hand open to the bone on a jagged blade protruding from the throne. Though Grand Maester Mellos washed the cutout with boiled wine and bound up the hand with strips of linen soaked in healing ointments, fever soon followed, and many feared the king might die. Only the arrival of Princess Rhaenyra from Dragonstone turned the tide, for with her came her own healer, Maester Gerardes, who acted swiftly to remove 2 fingers from his Grace's hand to save his life. So it was not even Grand Maester Mellos who amputated the 2 fingers to save King Viserys' life. And then I compared the same passage in the Rise of the Dragon book, and all it says is that Viserys accidentally cut his hand as he descended the Iron Throne. Though tended by Grand Maester Mellos, the wound became so infected and the king so feverish that some feared he would die. To save his life, Rhaenyra's celebrated Maester Gerardes intervened, amputating 2 of the king's fingers. So Rise of the Dragon, which is supposed to be a summarized version, which George R.R. Martin himself said removed 3/4 of the words from Fire and Blood, added the words that the wound became so infected. Fire and Blood only mentioned that fever soon followed following the treatments of Grand Maester Mellos, but Rise of the Dragon specifically added the words that the wound became so infected after the treatments of Grand Maester Mellos. And then in the books, Grand Maester Mellos died a couple of years after that, and the new Grand Maester, sent by the Citadel, treated the king, who died soon after. Maester Orwyle in the show is given a different role from the Archmaester Orwyle in the books. So, the differences from the show is that in the Rise of the Dragon book, it states, not long after Grand Maester Mellos died, a new bone of contention arose as to who his successor should be. Rhaenyra and her blacks preferred that Maester Gerardes be selected. He was the one who had just saved his life, while Queen Alicent and her greens wanted Maester Alfador, who served at Hightower. Viserys dodged the matter by emphasizing the independence of the Archmaesters of Old Town, like we said in part 3 of this series, stating that he had no say in the result. Archmaester Orwyle was chosen by the Conclave and was dispatched to King's Landing. But if the Grand Maester conspiracy is true, then Archmaester Orwyle being chosen by the Conclave would also be part of this Grand Maester conspiracy to kill the dragons and the Targaryens, which is exactly basically similar to what happened with the successful assassination of King Aenys Targaryen following the unsuccessful assassination on his life by the poor fellows of the Fate of the Seven. Remember how eventually King Aenys fell ill. By late 41 AC, most of the realm had turned against him. His health improved briefly when Dowager Queen Visenya took over his care, but the king died 3 days later. Years afterward, however, it would be whispered that Visenya had poisoned the king, in part because she departed Dragonstone within the hour of his death and did not attend his funeral. Keep in mind, Fire and Blood was written based on the point of view of Archmaester Gildain of the Citadel of Old Town. So of course he wouldn't mind sharing in his writings that it was Queen Visenya who had poisoned the king, which it was, because the proof was that right after he died, she flew on Vhagar, went to get Maegor and Balerion, and crowned him right there and then. And it's very similar to the death of King Viserys in the books, which I call the successful assassination of King Viserys Targaryen. Look at the similarities in this passage. George R.R. Martin is paralleling their death, basically. Viserys' health seemed to improve under Orwell's care, but only for a brief time. As his vitality continued to drain away, the king left more and more governance of the realm to Sir Otto Hightower and the Small Council. And then, by the second moon of 129 AC, Viserys had lost his appetite and was confined to his bed. On the third day of the third moon of 129 AC, after telling his young grandchildren fanciful stories of Jaehaerys, the old king, waging war against giants and wargs beyond the wall, the king sent his family away so he could rest. He never woke again. He was 52 years old at his death and had reigned 26 years. So, Part 5, King Viserys and the Balon the Brave Assassination Revelation. You may be wondering, who is Balon the Brave? King Aegon, the Conqueror of Westeros, had a son named Aenys who became the second king. He was Balon the Brave's grandfather, and his son Jaehaerys became the longest reigning king in Westeros for 55 long years. Then Prince Balon the Brave became a father of his own with King Viserys and Prince Daemon. In this clip from the final scene of episode 4 of season 1, King Viserys Targaryen calls upon his hand, Otto Hightower, to hold him accountable for the death of his father, Prince Balon the Brave. Balon held the position of King's Hand before Otto was selected to serve Jaehaerys during his final days. Viserys describes Balon as being the apex of House Targaryen, a young and powerful dragon-riding knight who was the first Targaryen to be able to tame the dragon Vhagar since Queen Visenya herself righted him to conquer Westeros. In this epic monologue, Viserys is implying that the death of Balon was too convenient, claiming that the events that followed the passing of Balon and even later on his beloved wife, Queen Aemma Arryn, as well-calculated moves, adding that House Hightower benefited so much from these events, gaining a new hand of the king in Otto, and a new queen in Alicent, to have been simple chance coincidences. This scene revealing the final conversation before Otto was dismissed from his position as Hand of the King was never revealed in the book. Instead, the books only state that Viserys dismissed Otto because he kept insisting on putting Aegon as the new heir instead of Rhaenyra. This revelation is so massive because it provides one of the strongest proofs in House of the Dragon and in this series, confirming the Grand Maester conspiracy theory as being an integral part of George R.R. Martin's plan since the fourth book of A Song of Ice and Fire was released, A Feast for Crows, when Archmaester Marwyn introduced the theory. My father was a hale and healthy warrior and dragon rider. He had a long reign ahead of him. Jaehaerys had just reigned for 55 long years. Balon the Brave could have easily reigned for a few decades himself. Then Viserys says at the peak of his abilities, Balon became a knight at the age of 16, entering the lists as a mystery knight. Balon unhorsed 5 great lords and knights before falling to Sir Rickard Redwyne, one of the greatest knights at the time. Sir Rickard helped him to his feet, unmasked him, and knighted him on the spot. Rider of Vhagar. Vhagar the Conqueror, one of the 3 dragons used by Aegon and his sisters to conquer Westeros. A dragon so large and powerful that if he were to fall in the wrong hands, would lead to devastating consequences for Westeros. Question 2. Who benefited? In Book 1 of A Song of Ice and Fire, A Game of Thrones, Varys says the following quote, "Oh, indeed, Cersei gave him the wineskins and told him it was Robert's favorite vintage. A hunter lives a perilous life. If the boar had not done for Robert, it would have been a fall from a horse, the bite of a wood adder, an arrow gone astray. The forest is the abattoir of the gods." I want you to look at these 2 specific lines. A hunter lives a perilous life implies that in Westeros, the forest is the best place for someone to be murdered without attracting too many questions, even a king. Adding that the forest is the abattoir of the gods making fun of the fact that the gods of the forest are the humans themselves, because George R.R. Martin doesn't believe in God, and I'm not sure Varys does either. A great royal hunt. A few days later, the king dies and Cersei becomes the second most powerful in the realm. This is a perfect parallel to Balon, how he went to a great royal hunt, and 5 days later, the soon-to-be king dies, and Otto Hightower becomes the second most powerful in the realm. I only now realize how well calculated it was. But Alicent. He says that because House Hightower even benefited from the death of Balon by gaining a brand new queen in Alicent Hightower, the second ever Hightower queen since Cerise Hightower. And if you watched part 3 of the series, you remember that Cerise Hightower was butchered by Maegor the Cruel. Question 3. Who has the power to cover it up? As Viserys said, Prince Balon died of a burst belly. His belly swelled and hardened, and the pain grew so severe it left him bedridden. The book's description of Balon's burst belly aligns perfectly with the symptoms one would experience if their appendix was to break. And this is exactly why no one has ever doubted that Balon the Brave died of appendicitis, until Viserys Targaryen revealed his theory that it was a well-calculated move by Otto to replace him as the new hand, and by the Grand Maester conspiracy to get rid of House Targaryen. To answer this, let's look at the Grand Maester timeline that I created. In 44 AC, Grand Maester Benifer, the only Grand Maester to survive Maegor, served for 14 years and died of the shivers. Then came in 60 AC, Grand Maester Elisar, known to be very opinionated. He served for 37 years under King Jaehaerys and died of old age. Then in 97 AC came Grand Maester Alar. He only served for 4 years and died of a heart attack. Then in 101 AC came Grand Maester Runesitter, who arrived shortly before Balon fell ill and served for 15 years, whose death was unknown. Looking at these quotes from Fire and Blood reveals that in 101 AC, Prince Balon complained of a stitch in his side while hunting in the Kingswood. Runesitter, the new Grand Maester, only recently arrived from the Citadel after Alar was felled by a stroke. He was able to bring the prince's fever down somewhat and give him some relief from agony with milk of the poppy, but his condition continued to worsen. Notice how it's written that his condition continued to worsen after taking the milk of the poppy, very similarly to how it happened for King Viserys. And in part 4, we analyzed the milk of the poppy and found a quote from Archmaester Marwyn through Mirri Maz Duur, where she said that the milk of the poppy should not be taken to allow the body to stay strong to fight the poison spirit. On the 5th day of his illness, Prince Balon died in his bedchamber in the Tower of the Hand, with his father sitting beside him, holding his hand. After opening the corpse, Grand Maester Runesitter put down the cause of death as a burst belly. Now remember how we said that Archmaester Gildain is the writer of Fire and Blood? George R.R. Martin wrote the entire book as a history book within Westeros, written by the point of view of an Archmaester of the Citadel. Who has the power to cover it up? Archmaester Gildain writes that Runesitter put down the cause of death as a burst belly. Whenever Archmaester Gildain described the death of any other character in Fire and Blood, he states the death of that character as a fact because he probably confirmed it through multiple sources. But for Balon, he writes that the burst belly diagnosis was put down by Runesitter as if he doesn't have any other source to corroborate it. So, isn't it weird how Grandmaster Runesitter arrived shortly before Balon fell ill? He arrived literally right before the Great Royal Hunt, where Balon died, as if Grandmaester Alar, who mysteriously died of a heart attack right before, after only serving for 4 years, had been murdered to allow Runesitter to come in and commit the murder of Balon. Maybe Grandmaester Alar wasn't murdered and really did die of a heart attack right before the Great Royal Hunt, and then Grandmaester Runesitter came and finished the assassination plot that Grandmaester Alar was going to commit anyway. But the fact that Alar only served for 4 years when all of the other Maesters around this period served for over a decade is just a little bit suspicious. What else did they cover up? To be able to find the first Targaryen assassination, let's look at this timeline of major Targaryens. Prince Aemon, the heir, killed on Tart accidentally when a Mirror scout was trying to target the Lord standing next to Aemon and threw a crossbow bolt at Aemon instead, he died in 92 AC. Then in 101 AC died Prince Balon, the Spare, who was famous for always striving to equal his brother Aemon in every achievement that he accomplished. He died of a burst belly. Then came King Jaehaerys, known as the Conciliator, who reigned for 55 years. He died of old age in 103 AC. Then, in 129 AC, died King Viserys, the young king, from throne cuts, which, if you watch part 4 of this series, you will find out that this was not true. Now, the first question that came to my mind was, did Prince Aemon really die accidentally on Tarth, or was he murdered by someone sent by the Grand Maester conspiracy?
And then, Aemon dies accidentally when a Mirish crossbowman shoots him by accident.
In this clip, we see that George R.R. Martin confidently confirms that Aemon really did die accidentally by a Mirish crossbowman. So the first Targaryen assassination by the Grand Maester conspiracy really was in 101 AC with Prince Balon the Brave. They called them the Heir and the Spare, so once the heir died accidentally, it was a perfect time for them to kill the Spare and be rid of both very talented and powerful Targaryen princelings. But why wait until 101 AC? Indeed, it does make sense to take advantage of the accidental death of Prince Aemon, but remember what else happened in 101 AC? The Great Council. And we're not going to talk about this in this video, but a lot of people think that very shady stuff happened in the Great Council that elected Viserys over Rhaenys. So, during the reign of Jaehaerys, between 48 AC and 103 AC, there was an heir and a spare, and this term comes from the following quote, which is very important. From the loins of the old king and his beloved queen sprang such a confusion of claims and claimants. Then many maesters believed that the dance of the dragons, or some similar struggle, was inevitable. This was not apparent in the early years of Jaehaerys' reign, for in Prince Aemon and Prince Balon, his grace had the proverbial heir and a spare, and seldom has the realm been blessed with two more able princes. Then in 92 AC, Aemon Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne, dies on Tarth. Then in 94 AC, Balerion the Black Dread dies of old age less than a year after Prince Viserys claims him. Then in 100 AC, on the first day of the 7th moon, good Queen Alysanne dies a full century after Aegon's conquest. Then in 101 AC came the death of Balon the Brave, the first Targaryen assassination by the conspiracy, which makes perfect sense that it was the first because after the death of Aemon, of Balerion the Black Dread, the most dangerous dragon, the death of good Queen Alysanne, and the upcoming death of Jaehaerys the Old King, there was no better time for them to make their move than in 101 AC. With the upcoming Great Council that was going to elect the next king, all they had to do was kill Balon the Brave and make sure that Viserys the Young King would be elected king. Sir Otto brought his wife and children to court with him and served King Jaehaerys faithfully for the years remaining to him. As the old king's strength and wits began to fail, Sir Otto's 15-year-old daughter Alicent became his constant companion, fetching his grace his meals, reading to him, helping him bathe, and dress himself. Part 6. A King with No Sons. In our last video, we covered the assassination of King Viserys' father, Balon the Brave, by House Hightower, which we uncovered thanks to the speech that King Viserys gave to his hand Otto before releasing him from his duties. Today we'll analyze how King Viserys' theory is actually the key to revealing a previously hidden pattern. In 101 AC, first we have Balon the Brave, heir to the Iron Throne, young and healthy, murdered during the royal hunt. Then, in 104 AC, the unknown son of Viserys and Aemma Arryn, heir to the Iron Throne, successful birth, dead during infancy, cause of death unknown. Then, in 105 AC, we have Balon the Heir for a Day, heir to the Iron Throne, successful birth and dead during infancy, cause of death unknown. Then in 129 AC, we have Viserys the Young King, He was healthy and he was murdered by Grand Maester Mellos. This is something that we proved in part 4, proving the assassination of King Viserys. But why stop at Balon the Brave? In this scene in episode 1, a Maester comes to whisper. He ignores his king and goes directly to the Hand instead to talk about the fate of the king's wife. Then, in the next scene, Grand Maester Mellos is seen talking to other Maesters in the corner of the room. I'd like you to remember that detail because we'll be bringing it back later. Then, right after that, we see Grand Maester Mellos give an impossible choice to King Viserys to choose between saving the queen or saving baby Balon. But it's only the illusion of a choice, because no matter what the king will choose, the Maesters will make sure that both Queen Aemma Arryn and her baby Balon will both die. And the Hand of the King, Otto Hightower, doesn't even stay back in the room to try and help his king make this impossible choice. Instead, we see him coming back to the royal box as if he's doing a victory walk, followed instantly by the image of a bloody bed, which actually represents a bloody battlefield. I also want you to notice that in this shot, Grand Maester Mellos is returning from the Maester's corner with baby Balon. The midwives look worried, even though it should be a happy moment, since Grand Maester Mellos is not only congratulating the king for the successful birth, but also revealing that he made the right choice, since the baby is actually a boy, the new heir on the Iron Throne. And they also have no reason to be worried, since we even hear the baby crying, which is the sign of a healthy baby. Also, notice how the midwives are standing at the complete opposite corner of the Maesters. Even though they were shown to be actively helping during the C-section, it seems like the Maester didn't want them to be involved in anything post-birth. And then Balon's crying suddenly becomes much weaker, and we even see and hear a cracking in his voice, which Mellos immediately notices since we see his face slightly change. But he doesn't look surprised or even worried. But even more suspicious, the King's Grand Maester doesn't seem to be in a rush to help baby Balon. And don't forget that Mellos was an Archmaester of the Citadel before being appointed as Grand Maester. He must know some treatments that can help a baby following a C-section. But instead, Grand Maester simply waits, as if he's expecting something to happen. And then I wanted to confirm, so I checked out the 4K version of the Season 1 box set. In this official version, the subtitles are actually slightly different in how they present the sound descriptions. And right here, look at how they describe baby Balon's crying. Baby gurgling. That is something that even while hearing it, I had never noticed before. Baby Balon is gurgling on the poison that the Maesters had just given him in the corner of the room where the midwives were not allowed to be. This also explains the hand movements of Grand Maester Mellos. He hears the gargling and then raises baby Balon back up to make sure he swallows the poison properly. And he looks around him because for a second, he was worried that King Viserys and the midwives heard the gargling noise. And this was the last time we saw Balon the baby before his funeral. Baby Balon was poisoned by the alliance between the Hightowers of Old Town and the Maesters of the Citadel. And it was not the first time. Queen Aemma Arryn also revealed earlier in the episode that she actually experienced a total of 5 other failed pregnancies in the span of 10 years. First, 1 baby in the cradle, 2 stillbirths, and 2 pregnancies that ended well before their term. However, book version of Aemma Arryn was younger. In Fire and Blood, we're told that Aemma experienced her first failed pregnancy at the age of 15 years old. Rhaenyra was born in 97 AC. Aemma was 15 years old in the books at that time. And Balon the Brave died during a royal hunt in 100 AC. The first baby to die following a successful birth in the cradle was an unknown named son. Then she had 2 stillbirths, 2 miscarriages, and a second baby to die following a successful birth, which was baby Balon, and it was following a C-section. Aemma was 23 years old in the books when she died at that time. Now, let me ask you this. Don't you think that it's just a little weird that Aemma's daughter, Rhaenyra, also had a total of 6 pregnancies? Except that in her case, 5 were successful. And she was even older when she had her 6th pregnancy at 32 years old. But remember what Queen Aemma told Rhaenyra at the very beginning of episode 1. The childbed is a woman's battlefield. Which is also the very same battlefield where the Maesters hold the most power, which would give the Grand Maesters in particular the opportunity to kill the dragons right there on that very same battlefield. Remember in part 1, where we covered the origin of the theory, Grand Maester Marwyn tells Samwell Tarly that if I tell you, they may need to kill you too. Marwyn smiled a ghastly smile. Who do you think killed all the dragons the last time around? Gallant dragon slayers armed with swords. To conclude, the Grand Maester conspiracy timeline is as follows. In 101 AC, Balon is murdered during the royal hunt. In 104 AC, the unknown son is poisoned in the cradle. Third, in 105 AC, Balon, the heir for a day, is also poisoned following a C-section. Now, in 129 AC, as we saw in part 4, Viserys the Young King is murdered by Grand Maester Mellos. Now, keeping all of this in mind, we can now confidently say that King Viserys was right in episode 5 before he dismissed Otto Hightower as his hand when he said, "How long did it take you to choose yourself over your king?" to Otto Hightower. So let's answer his question. When did it start? In the books, in 60 AC, Grand Maester Elisar is appointed, and for 37 years, there is peace under King Jaehaerys. Then in 97 AC, Grand Maester Alar replaces Elisar and dies of a heart attack after 4 years of serving him. Then in 101 AC, Grand Maester Runesiter replaces Alar, and in the same year, Prince Balon the Brave dies. In the same year, Otto Hightower is also appointed. Then in 105 AC, Queen Aemma Arryn and Balon both die during childbirth, and in 112 AC, Grand Maester Mellos replaces Runesiter following his death, which is unknown. Then in 112 AC, Mellos recommends Rhaenyra marries Laenor, and in 120 AC, Mellos advances the possibility that Viserys had ordered the death of Harwin Strong because he had come to accept the rumors about the parentage of Rhaenyra's children. And so we can now confidently say that in the books, Grand Maester Runesiter is the one who killed Balon the Brave. But in the TV show, Runesiter is actually replaced by Grand Maester Mellos. So, in conclusion, Grand Maester Mellos killed Balon the Brave in the TV show. Lord Hightower determined that he would not oppose the conqueror by force of arms. Thus, it was that no man from Old Town burned on the field of fire. And this type of complex hidden conspiracy in House of the Dragon is why in Ryan Condal we trust. So generally it's George and I in communication. I send him everything. I send him outlines. I send him scripts. I send him cuts. I send him text messages. I send him questions. Why did you do this? What does this mean? Who is this person? We stayed in constant communication. He's very active and reads a lot and gives a lot of feedback. Part 7. The secret involvement of House Stark. That was how it was with Lord Rickard Stark. Maester Wallace was his Grey Rat's name. And isn't it clever how the Maesters go by only one name? Even those who had two when they first arrived at the Citadel. That way, we cannot know who they truly are or where they come from. But if you are dogged enough, you can still find out. A Dance with Dragons. Before he forged his chain, Maester Wallace had been known as Wallace Flowers. Flowers, hill, rivers, snow. We give such names to baseborn children to mark them for what they are, but they are always quick to shed them. Wallace Flowers had a Hightower girl for a mother and an Archmaester of the Citadel for a father. His secret father and his friends wasted no time dispatching him to Winterfell to fill Lord Rickard's ears with poisoned words sweet as honey. The Tully marriage was his notion, never doubt it. "My lady, why do you hate the Starks?" She studied him. "For the same reason you love them." I wanted to be one of them, said Theon. And never could, continued Lady Dustin. We have more in common than you know, my lord. And indeed, in this passage, we find out that Lady Dustin used to be with Brandon Stark before he died. The day I learned that Brandon was to marry Catelyn Tully, there was nothing sweet about that pain. He never wanted her, I promise you that. He told me so on our last night together. But Rickard Stark had great ambitions too. Southern ambitions that would not be served by having his heir marry the daughter of one of his own vassals. And so through Maester Wallace and a centuries-old alliance between the Maesters of the Citadel and House Hightower, the Old Town Alliance was able to convince the Lord of Winterfell and the Warden of the North to marry his heir to Winterfell to Catelyn Tully, forging an alliance between a southern Westerosi house and Winterfell. And now add to this Westerosi alliance House Baratheon, which uses the excuse of the disappearance of Lyanna Stark by the handsome Targaryen prince to trigger Robert's rebellion. It was the perfect excuse because at the famous tournament of Harrenhal, before the disappearance took place, all the great houses of Westeros witnessed the victory of Prince Rhaegar at that tournament, and how he gave the title of the greatest beauty of the tournament to Lyanna Stark, skipping his own wife, Elia Martell. And we all know how the story ended, with the death of the heir to the Iron Throne, Rhaegar Targaryen, and the death of King Aerys, second of his name, which ends up with the end of the Targaryen dynasty, and the end of our 7-part long series on the Grand Maester conspiracy. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, especially if you're looking forward to Season 2 of House of the Dragon. I already have a couple of videos that are underway, and you're not gonna want to miss them. I am Aegon the Informer, and you have been informed.